The vampire standing in her cramped kitchen looked like a creature carved from winter moonlight, and Rosalind Reed knew she was about to lose her job. His hair fell in silver-white waves past his shoulders, contrasting sharply against skin so pale it seemed to glow under her apartment's harsh fluorescent lights. Eyes the color of blood-tinged garnet studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch, and when he moved barely a shift of his weight, it was with a grace that defied human physics. He was beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful, all sharp lines and lethal elegance wrapped in an expensive black coat that probably cost more than her yearly rent. "You are Rosalind Reed," he said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place, something old and Eastern European that made her name sound like poetry. "The chef who prepared the meal at the Gilded Rose tonight." Rosalind pressed her back against the counter, very aware of how small her kitchen was, how her plus-size frame filled the space between the stove and the refrigerator, leaving barely enough room for this impossible being who had somehow followed her home. She was still wearing her chef's coat, stained with sauce and sweat from a brutal dinner service. Her dark, curly hair had escaped its bun hours ago, and she knew she looked exactly like what she was, an exhausted line cook who'd just worked a 14-hour shift. "How did you get in here?" she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your door was unlocked." "It wasn't." His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "It was for me." Rosalind's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. 5 years ago, vampires had revealed themselves to the world in a carefully orchestrated announcement that had sent humanity into chaos. They'd been living among humans for centuries, they had explained through spokespersons with perfect hair and practiced smiles. They meant no harm. They had laws, governance, a whole hidden society built in the shadows of human civilization. Blood could be obtained ethically now through donation centers and synthetic alternatives. Coexistence was possible. Some people had adapted quickly, others never would. Rosalind had fallen somewhere in the middle, acknowledging their existence while hoping to never encounter one directly. So much for that plan. "What do you want?" she asked, reaching behind her for the knife block. Her fingers brushed the handle of her chef's knife, the familiar weight grounding her. "I want you to cook for me again," he said simply. "Tomorrow night, and every night after." She blinked. "What?" "The meal you prepared tonight." He moved closer, and she tensed, but he only leaned against the opposite counter, somehow making the cramped space feel even smaller. The beef dish with the wine reduction and roasted vegetables. It was served to me. By mistake, I was attending the restaurant as a courtesy to the owner who believed I might invest in his establishment. I do not eat human food. I have not eaten human food in 417 years. Then why? Because the scent was extraordinary. His eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her skin prickle. I have walked past human meals for centuries with barely a notice. The smell of cooked flesh, of plants and spices, it means nothing to vampires. We cannot digest it, cannot draw sustenance from it. It is as appealing to us as dirt might be to you. But tonight, when that plate was set before me, something changed. For the first time since I was turned, I wanted to taste it. So I did. Rosalind's hand fell away from the knife. "That's impossible." "I am aware." His expression remained unreadable. I took one bite, and though it provided no nourishment, though my body cannot process it, the flavor was unlike anything in my memory. It reminded me of being human, of sitting at my mother's table in a life so distant I had nearly forgotten it existed. Something in his voice caught her off guard, a thread of vulnerability that seemed at odds with his predatory stillness. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Vampires can't taste human food. Everyone knows that. We cannot, yet I did." He tilted his head, studying her, which leaves only one conclusion. It was not the food itself, but something about you, the way you prepared it. Some quality you possess that I have never encountered. That's insane. Perhaps. He pushed away from the counter, and suddenly he was closer, looming over her in a way that should have been threatening, but instead felt strangely protective, as if he were shielding her from some invisible threat. "Nevertheless, I require your services. Name your price." "I have a job." "Quit it. I can't just—" "You work 60 hours a week in a kitchen that barely pays your rent. You have culinary school debt you cannot afford, and your landlord is threatening eviction." "I have done my research." "Miss Reed," his voice softened slightly, I can offer you more than financial security. I can offer you a chance to cook without constraints, without cheap ingredients, and demanding managers who do not appreciate your skill. Rosalind's throat tightened. You investigated me? I investigate anyone I intend to bring into my household. I haven't agreed to anything. You will. The sheer confidence in those 2 words should have made her angry. Instead, it sent a strange flutter through her chest. She crossed her arms, very aware of how her chef's coat pulled across her breasts and stomach, how her body took up space in a way that had made her the target of cruel comments from coworkers and customers alike. This vampire, this impossible being, didn't seem to notice or care. Why should I trust you? She asked. You shouldn't. He reached into his coat and withdrew a card, placing it on the counter between them. But I am not asking for trust. I am making a business proposition. Cook for me every night and I will pay you $10,000 per week. You will have access to the finest ingredients, a kitchen beyond your dreams, and freedom to create whatever you wish. 10,000. She couldn't finish the sentence. It was absurd. Impossible. More money than she'd made in 6 months. I am Xerxes Forthwright, he said, his voice dropping into something formal, ceremonial. King of the Eastern North American Coven. I rule from Quebec to Virginia, overseeing 63 vampire houses and approximately 4,000 of my kind. I am offering you a position in my household with all the protection and privileges that entails. The world seemed to tilt. Rosalind had heard the name Xerxes Forthwright before everyone had. He was one of the most powerful vampires in North America, a king in a world that still operated under old rules despite its modern trappings. And he was standing in her kitchen offering her a fortune to cook meals he shouldn't even be able to taste. This is crazy, she whispered. Yes, he agreed, which is why it intrigues me. Consider my offer, Miss Reed. I will return tomorrow at sunset for your answer. He moved toward the door, then paused, glancing back at her. For what it's worth, your talent is genuine. The humans at that restaurant tonight were fortunate, even if they did not realize they were eating art. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Rosalind was left alone in her cramped kitchen with a business card and a racing heart. She didn't sleep that night. How could she? Her mind spun through the implications, the impossibilities, the sheer strangeness of what had happened. By the time dawn broke, she'd convinced herself it had been a fever dream, stress-induced hallucination brought on by too many double shifts and not enough rest. But the card was still there on her counter, heavy cream stock with embossed lettering that read simply, Xerxes Forthwright, followed by a phone number. Rosalind went to work in a daze. The Gilded Rose was already buzzing with gossip when she arrived, apparently. Several vampire dignitaries had dined there the previous evening, and the owner was already planning to market the restaurant as vampire-friendly, raising prices and redesigning the menu to appeal to their new potential clientele. None of them knew that a vampire king had actually eaten the food. That one of her dishes had accomplished what should have been impossible. "Reed, you're on prep," her sous chef barked. "And try to keep up today. We've got critics coming tonight." She spent the morning dicing vegetables with mechanical precision, her mind elsewhere. $10,000 a week. Access to any ingredient she wanted, a kitchen beyond her dreams. Freedom. The word echoed in her thoughts as she worked. Freedom from the debt that suffocated her. Freedom from cramped apartments and broken stoves and managers who treated her like she was lucky to have a job at all. Freedom to create without limitation. But at what cost? Working for a vampire king, entering a world she barely understood, leaving behind everything familiar. You're thinking too hard. Rosalind looked up to find her coworker, Marcus, watching her with concern. He was a good guy, one of the few in this kitchen who had never made cruel comments about her weight or doubted her skills. Just tired, she said. You're always tired. This place is killing you, Roz. He lowered his voice. I heard the Riverside is hiring. Better hours, better pay. You should apply. She managed a smile. Maybe. But she knew she wouldn't. The Riverside wouldn't offer her anything more than a lateral move, another kitchen where she'd slowly burn out while barely scraping by. This industry loved to glorify chefs to make cooking seem romantic and artistic, but the reality was brutal hours, poverty wages, and a culture that celebrated abuse as tradition. By the time her shift ended, Rosalind had made her decision. She went home, showered, and changed into the nicest clothes she owned, a simple black dress that fit her curves without apology. Then she sat on her sagging couch and waited for sunset. Xerxes arrived precisely as the last light faded from her window. This time he knocked, a concession to courtesy that surprised her. Miss Reed, he said when she opened the door. He wore different clothes tonight, a dark suit that looked tailored to perfection, but his hair and eyes were exactly as she remembered. Unnaturally pale, inhumanly beautiful. I accept your offer, she said before she could lose her courage, but I have conditions. One elegant eyebrow lifted. Conditions. I want a contract. Everything in writing, including my rights and protections while in your employment. I want assurance that I can leave at any time if I feel unsafe. And I want to know exactly what you expect from me beyond cooking meals. You believe I might have ulterior motives. You're a vampire king offering me a fortune to cook food you can't digest. Of course you have ulterior motives. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You are wise to be cautious. Very well. You will have your contract reviewed by any human lawyer you choose. As for what I expect, only what I stated. 1 meal each night prepared by you of whatever cuisine you desire. In exchange, you will receive $10,000 per week, housing in my estate, and access to my kitchens and resources. Why me specifically? I do not know yet, he admitted. That is what I intend to discover. Something about you, Miss Reed, makes the impossible possible. I need to understand what that is. It was the honesty that decided her. He could have lied, could have offered pleasant fictions, but instead he'd given her the truth. He was as confused as she was and wanted answers. When do I start? She asked. Tonight. Pack what you need. I will send someone to collect the rest of your belongings tomorrow. That's fast. I have waited 400 years for something to taste like life again. I find I'm not patient enough to wait longer. There was something in his voice, a hunger that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with that glimpse of humanity he'd experienced. Rosalind understood hunger, the desperate kind that came from wanting something just out of reach, from yearning for a life that felt fuller, richer, more meaningful than simple survival. Give me 20 minutes, she said. She packed quickly, choosing practical clothes and her personal knives, the good ones she'd bought herself, not the cheap restaurant issue blades. Her apartment held little worth keeping. Most of her possessions were kitchen-related or necessary utilities. Her life had been pared down to essentials over years of financial struggle. Xerxes waited in silence, studying her space with an expression she couldn't read. When she emerged with 2 suitcases and her knife roll, he simply nodded and gestured toward the door. A car waited outside, sleek and black and probably worth more than everything Rosalind owned combined. The driver was human, a woman in her 30s who smiled professionally and introduced herself as Helena. I manage King Xerxes' household staff, she explained as she loaded Rosalind's bags. You'll be working primarily with me regarding scheduling and logistics. The drive took them out of the city into the wealthy suburbs where old money built estates hidden behind gates and manicured lawns. They passed through a security checkpoint that would have looked at home protecting a government facility, then down a winding road lined with ancient oaks. The mansion emerged from the darkness like something from a Gothic fairy tale. Gray stone and tall windows, turrets and arched doorways, all of it managing to look both medieval and somehow modern. Lights glowed warmly from within, and Rosalind could see other buildings scattered across the grounds, guest houses perhaps, or offices. Welcome to Ravenscroft, Helena said. It's been King Xerxes' primary residence for 70 years. Though the structure itself is much older, he had it transported from Europe, stone by stone, and rebuilt here. Rosalind could only stare. She'd known intellectually that vampires were wealthy, that their longevity allowed them to accumulate resources beyond human comprehension. But seeing it, standing before this testament to immortal power, made it viscerally real. Xerxes exited the car with fluid grace and offered her his hand. Come, I will show you your domain. She took his hand before thinking better of it, and the coolness of his skin sent a jolt through her. Not unpleasant, just different, a reminder that he wasn't human, wasn't anything close to human, despite his beautiful face and courtly manners. He led her through hallways decorated with artwork that belonged in museums, past rooms furnished with antiques and modern pieces that somehow complemented each other. Vampires and a few humans moved through the space, all of them pausing to bow slightly as Xerxes passed. He acknowledged them with brief nods but didn't stop until they reached a set of double doors near the back of the mansion. This, he said, pushing the doors open, is yours. Rosalind stepped into the most beautiful kitchen she'd ever seen. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of the cramped line she'd worked in that morning. Professional-grade appliances gleamed under perfect lighting. Counter space stretched for miles, all marble and butcher block. 2 full-size refrigerators stood against one wall next to a walk-in freezer. Shelves held every pot, pan, and tool she could imagine, and she suspected the drawers and cabinets contained even more. "The pantry is through there," Xerxes gestured to another door. "Fully stocked, though you need only tell Helena what you require and it will be provided. This kitchen serves only you and your purposes. The household staff has their own facilities." This is... She couldn't find words. Her eyes burned with sudden, unexpected tears. "Adequate?" he suggested, and there was something almost gentle in his voice. "It's perfect," she whispered. She walked slowly through the space, running her fingers over the cool marble, testing the weight of a copper sauté pan hanging from a rack, opening the refrigerator to find it stocked with ingredients she'd only dreamed of affording. Fresh truffles, real vanilla beans, organic produce that looked like it had been harvested that morning, Wagyu beef, fresh seafood on ice. "Why?" she asked, turning to face him. "Why all of this for meals you can barely taste?" Xerxes leaned against the counter, his pale eyes reflecting the kitchen lights. "Because I tasted my humanity tonight for the first time in centuries. Because for one moment I was not a monster, not a king, not an immortal creature of blood and darkness. I was simply someone eating a meal my mother might have made, and I remembered what it felt like to be alive." He paused. "That memory, Miss Reed, is worth any price." The raw honesty in his words struck something deep in Rosalind's chest. She'd expected arrogance, perhaps cruelty, the casual disregard for human feelings that characterize vampires in popular media. Instead, she found this a being who'd lived for centuries confessing that he'd forgotten what it meant to be human until her food had reminded him. "What would you like me to make tonight?" she asked softly. "Whatever calls to you." So she cooked. Not anything fancy, not the elaborate restaurant dishes meant to impress critics and justify high prices. Instead, she made comfort food, chicken braised with herbs and white wine, roasted potatoes with garlic and rosemary, green beans sautéed with shallots. The kind of meal that felt like home, like safety, like someone cared enough to nourish you. Xerxes sat at the small table in the corner of the kitchen and watched her work. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, just observed with that unsettling intensity that should have made her nervous but somehow didn't. She found herself falling into the rhythm of cooking, the meditation of it, the way time disappeared when she was creating something with her hands. When she plated the meal, she did it simply, no architectural arrangements or artistic drizzles, just honest food presented with care. Xerxes stared at the plate for a long moment before picking up his fork. Rosalind held her breath as he took the first bite, his eyes closed. His expression shifted through emotions too complex to name: longing, grief, joy, pain. When he opened his eyes again, they were bright with something that looked almost like tears, though vampires couldn't cry. "It tastes like sunlight," he said quietly. "Like summer afternoons and my sister's laughter. Like everything I lost when I was turned." Rosalind sat down across from him, her own throat tight. "What was your sister's name?" "Elisabetta." He took another bite, savoring it. "She died in 1642. Plague. I could not save her." "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." "That doesn't make it hurt less." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in the air between them. Recognition, perhaps, understanding. Two people who'd both hungered for something just out of reach, finding an unexpected connection. "No," he agreed, "it does not." They talked while he ate. Slow conversation that felt strangely natural despite their impossible circumstances. He asked about her training, her inspirations, what had drawn her to cooking. She asked carefully about his life, his responsibilities as a king, what it meant to govern vampires in a modern world. "We are not so different from humans," he admitted. "We have politics, feuds, alliances. We fall in love and betray each other. We are simply harder to kill and have much longer to hold grudges." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." He finished the last bite and set down his fork with clear reluctance. "Thank you, Miss Reed. That was extraordinary." "Rosalind," she said, "if I'm going to cook for you every night, you should use my first name." "Rosalind." He said it carefully, tasting the syllables. "Then you must call me Xerxes. I find I prefer less formality in my kitchen." She smiled despite herself. "Your kitchen? I thought you said it was mine." "A slip of the tongue." But there was warmth in his expression, something almost playful. "Tomorrow night, then?" "Tomorrow night," she agreed. Helena appeared to show Rosalind to her rooms, a suite larger than her entire apartment had been, with a bedroom, sitting area, and private bathroom that looked like something from a luxury hotel. The bed was enormous and piled with pillows. The furniture was antique but comfortable, and someone had already unpacked her meager belongings, hanging her clothes in a closet that swallowed them with room to spare. "If you need anything, use the phone," Helena said, gesturing to a sleek device on the nightstand. "It connects directly to the house staff. Breakfast is available from 6 to 10 in the main dining room, though we can bring something to your room if you prefer. King Xerxes typically rises around sunset, so you'll want to plan dinner preparations for 7 or 8 o'clock. Does he really only eat what I make now?" Helena's expression softened. "He feeds, of course. Blood is still necessary for survival. But yes, you're the only one cooking human food for him. In all my years serving this household, I've never seen him take interest in our meals. You're something special, Miss Reed." After Helena left, Rosalind sat on the edge of her new bed and tried to process everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she'd been a struggling line cook with mounting debts and no prospects. Now she was living in a vampire king's mansion, with a kitchen beyond her wildest dreams and a salary that seemed fictional. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something else, entirely possibility. That night, she dreamed of pale eyes and ancient memories, of meals that could restore lost humanity, and she woke feeling like her life had finally, impossibly found its purpose. The days developed a rhythm. Rosalind would wake late, explore the mansion grounds, experiment in her kitchen with ingredients that arrived daily based on her requests. She cooked not just for Xerxes, but for herself, for Helena, and the other human staff, finding joy in feeding people who appreciated her work without the pressure and abuse of restaurant culture. Evenings belonged to Xerxes. He would arrive at her kitchen as the sun set, and she would serve him whatever she'd created that day. Sometimes it was elaborate French techniques and complex sauces that took hours to perfect. Other times, it was simple pasta with fresh tomatoes and basil, roasted chicken with lemon, soup that simmered all afternoon. It didn't matter what she made. He tasted humanity in all of it. They talked during these meals, conversations that stretched longer each night. He told her about his turning, how he'd been a soldier in the Ottoman Empire, wounded in battle and offered immortality by a vampire general who'd seen potential in him. He described centuries of existence, the slow accumulation of power and responsibility, the loneliness of watching everyone he'd ever cared about turn to dust while he remained unchanged. She told him about growing up poor, about discovering cooking as a way to show love when there wasn't money for much else, about culinary school and the harsh reality of an industry that chewed up dreamers and spit them out broken. She told him about being fat in a world that treated it as a moral failing, about kitchen culture that valued thinness as proof of discipline, as if her body somehow reflected on her talent. "That is absurd," Xerxes said flatly when she mentioned it. "Your skill has nothing to do with your form. Try telling that to the chef who told me I'd never work fine dining because customers wouldn't respect a fat woman in the kitchen." His expression darkened. "Give me his name." "Why?" "So I might have a conversation with him about appropriate behavior." Despite herself, Rosalind laughed. "You can't threaten everyone who's ever been cruel to me. You'd spend eternity on it." "I am immortal. I have the time." But he was almost smiling. That slight curve of his lips that she'd learned meant he was genuinely amused, rather than merely being polite. Weeks passed. Rosalind found herself looking forward to sunset, to the moment when Xerxes would appear in her kitchen doorway, elegant and impossible and entirely focused on her. He started arriving earlier, watching her cook with fascination, asking questions about techniques and ingredients. Sometimes he would sit at the counter and talk about his day, political maneuvering between vampire houses, human-vampire relations issues, the constant work of maintaining peace in a world still adjusting to their existence. She realized gradually that she was falling for him. It was absurd and dangerous and probably suicidal, but her heart didn't care about logic. She noticed everything about him now, the way he moved with predatory grace, how his voice softened when he talked about his lost family, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes when she mentioned past cruelties. He was dangerous and ancient and could kill her with barely any effort, but he sat in her kitchen every night and ate meals that couldn't nourish him just to feel human for a little while. How could she not fall in love with that? The problem was she had no idea what he felt. He was courteous, respectful, clearly enjoyed their conversations and her cooking, but he was also a vampire king, and she was just a human chef who'd somehow gained the impossible ability to make him taste food. Their relationship was transactional, a business arrangement, and reading anything more into it was a recipe for heartbreak. Then the threats started. The first letter arrived with the evening delivery of ingredients, tucked among the boxes of produce and meat. Helena found it, her face pale as she handed it to Rosalind. "I think you need to show this to King Xerxes," she said quietly. The letter was written in elegant script on heavy paper, the kind of formal correspondence vampires apparently still preferred. The words were polite, almost cordial, but the message was clear. Rosalind's presence in Xerxes' household was noted and considered problematic by certain members of vampire society. They suggested she leave for her own safety. It was signed with a symbol rather than a name 3 overlapping crescents. "What does this mean?" Rosalind asked when Xerxes read the letter that evening, his expression carefully blank. "It means you have attracted attention from people who would prefer I remain focused entirely on vampire affairs." He set the letter down with controlled precision. "The symbol belongs to the Lunar Court, a faction that believes vampires should segregate ourselves from humanity, rule rather than coexist. They want you to get rid of me. They want many things." His voice was cold now, the warmth she'd grown accustomed to replaced by something harder, more dangerous. "What they want is irrelevant. You are under my protection, Rosalind. No one will harm you. Maybe I should... No." He stood moving around the table to face her. "Do not suggest leaving. Do not give them that power. You are mine to protect, and I do not yield to threats." The possessiveness in his voice sent heat through her chest. "I'm not yours." "Are you not?" He moved closer, and suddenly the kitchen felt very small. "You live in my house, cook in my kitchen, have become essential to my existence in ways I did not think possible after 4 centuries of living. If that does not make you mine, what would?" Rosalind's breath caught. "Xerxes, I am trying very hard to be honorable," he said quietly. "You are human, under my protection, in my employ. The power imbalance is significant, and I will not abuse it. But you should know that these dinners have become the center of my existence, that I spend my days thinking of you, anticipating our evenings together, that watching you cook has become more satisfying than any hunt, any political victory, any pleasure I have experienced in centuries." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "You can't mean that. I am 417 years old. I do not say things I do not mean. I'm just a human. You're a king. I'm extraordinary." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with one cool hand. "You are talented, passionate, resilient, beautiful. You have somehow given me back a piece of my humanity I thought lost forever. How could I not treasure you?" "Beautiful." The word came out skeptical, wounded. She'd been called many things, but beautiful was rarely one of them. His eyes flashed. "Do not question what I see. You are beautiful in your curves, your strength, your presence. Every inch of you is perfect, and I will not hear you diminish yourself." Rosalind felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know how to do this. Neither do I." His thumb brushed her cheek. "I have not courted anyone in over 2 centuries, and human customs have changed significantly since then. But I would like to try, if you would permit it. This is crazy. You're a vampire king. I'm a chef with student loans. This doesn't make sense." "Very little about us makes sense. You make me taste food I should not be able to taste. I make you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. Perhaps sense is overrated." Despite everything, she laughed. "That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Then I have set the bar dangerously low and will need to improve." But he was almost smiling again. That hint of warmth that transformed his face from beautiful to breathtaking. "The Lunar Court won't give up," she said softly. "If they think I'm a distraction, then they will learn what happens when someone threatens what belongs to me." The possessiveness was back, fierce and protective. "I am not a young vampire, Rosalind. I did not become king by being diplomatic and kind. I have fought wars, eliminated rivals, protected my territory with whatever force necessary. Anyone who threatens you threatens me, and I do not tolerate such disrespect." It should have been frightening, this reminder of his violent nature. Instead, Rosalind felt safer than she'd ever felt in her life. He was dangerous, yes, but not to her. Never to her. "Okay, she whispered. Then I'd like to try too. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, his lips cool against hers, but the emotion behind it blazingly warm. It was brief, chaste almost, but it sent electricity through her entire body. When he pulled back, his eyes had darkened to deep burgundy, and she understood that his control was costing him. I should go, he said roughly, before I forget myself. What if I don't want you to go? Rosalind. Her name was a plea and a warning. I'm trying to be honorable. What if I don't need you to be honorable? What if I just need you to be here? He closed his eyes briefly. You are making this very difficult. Good. That surprised a genuine laugh from him, and the sound was so unexpected, so free, that Rosalind wanted to hear it again and again. Very well, but I'm staying only to talk. I will not take advantage. You're not taking advantage if I'm asking. Nevertheless, he returned to his seat, though his eyes never left her. Tell me what you want to cook tomorrow, something that will require my assistance, perhaps. So they talked about food, about recipes and techniques, about her dreams of eventually opening her own place where she could cook without pretension or cruelty. He listened like every word mattered, offering suggestions and asking questions, and by the time he finally left, Rosalind was half convinced she'd imagined the kiss. But the next evening, he arrived with flowers night-blooming jasmine, their scent sweet and strange. I am told humans appreciate these gestures, he said, almost shy. You're told correctly. She accepted them with a smile that felt like it might split her face. Thank you. Their courtship was old-fashioned and entirely unique. He brought her gifts, rare ingredients from around the world, a set of Japanese knives that cost more than a car, books on culinary history from his personal library. She cooked meals that made him remember being human, and they talked until dawn threatened, at which point he would retreat to whatever chambers he slept in during the day. He kissed her goodnight now, lingering touches that left her wanting more but always pulling back before things went too far. His restraint was maddening and somehow endearing, this ancient vampire king courting her with all the careful propriety of a Victorian gentleman. Then the lunar court escalated. Rosalind was in the garden, gathering herbs for that night's meal, when she sensed someone behind her. She turned to find a vampire she didn't recognize, a woman with the characteristic pale skin and white hair, dressed in flowing black robes that seemed more costume than practical clothing. You must be the human causing such disruption, the woman said, her voice carrying an accent similar to Xerxes's but harder, colder. Rosalind Reed, the chef who has distracted our king from his duties. I don't know who you are, Rosalind said carefully, but you're trespassing on private property. I am Seraphine of the lunar court. I do not trespass. I go where I wish. She moved closer, moving with that impossible vampire speed, and suddenly she was right in front of Rosalind, her red eyes boring into her. You are a problem, little human. Xerxes was a strong king before you arrived. Now he spends his evenings playing house with a mortal, eating food like some kind of pet human. It is embarrassing. That's not your concern. When the king's weakness becomes obvious to other vampire courts, it becomes all of our concern. You make him vulnerable, soft. Her hand shot out, grabbing Rosalind's throat with bruising force. I could kill you right now, snap your neck before anyone could intervene. Perhaps that would remind him of what he truly is. Rosalind couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Black spots danced in her vision. She clawed at Seraphine's hand uselessly, her human strength nothing against vampire power. Release her! Xerxes' voice cut through the garden like a blade. He stood at the edge of the path, but his appearance was nothing like the gentle suitor who'd courted Rosalind for weeks. This was a king, a predator, death wrapped in beautiful packaging. His eyes blazed red, his fangs were visible, and the air around him seemed to crackle with barely contained violence. Now, he added, and the word was a command that brooked no argument. Seraphine dropped Rosalind, who collapsed, gasping to the ground. My king! You were merely assaulting someone under my protection in my home. Xerxes moved, and suddenly he had Seraphine by the throat, lifting her effortlessly off the ground. That is a crime punishable by death under our laws. Give me one reason I should not execute you where you stand. The lunar court will tolerate whatever I decree, or I will dismantle them piece by piece. His voice was utterly calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. You have forgotten yourself, Seraphine, forgotten who rules here. Allow me to remind you. Xerxes, don't! Rosalind managed to speak, her throat burning. "Please." He glanced at her, and something in his expression softened minutely. "She hurt you." "I'm okay, just let her go." "She threatened your life." "And you stopped her." "Please, I don't want you to kill someone because of me." He studied her for a long moment, then looked back at Seraphine with cold fury. "You live because she is merciful, but you will deliver a message to your lunar court. Rosalind Reed is under my personal protection. Any threat to her is a declaration of war against me personally. I have lived 4 centuries and conquered challenges that would destroy lesser vampires. If they wish to test me, they will discover exactly how I earned my crown." He released Seraphine, who dropped to the ground coughing. "Get out of my sight. If I see you again, her mercy will not save you." Seraphine fled with vampire speed, disappearing into the shadows. As soon as she was gone, Xerxes was at Rosalind's side, his hands gentle as they examined her throat. "She bruised you," he said softly, and there was rage still simmering in his voice. "I should have killed her." "I'm glad you didn't." Rosalind touched his face, drawing his eyes to hers. "I don't want death on my conscience." "Then the death will be on mine if they try again. I will not show mercy twice." He carried her inside despite her protests that she could walk, taking her directly to his private chambers, a suite she'd never seen, decorated in dark woods and rich fabrics that managed to be both opulent and comfortable. He set her on a sofa carefully, then retrieved ice wrapped in cloth for her throat. "This is my fault," he said as he pressed the ice gently to her bruises. "I should have anticipated this. Should have posted guards around you at all times. I'm not a prisoner." "No, but you are precious to me, and I should have protected you better." His jaw clenched. "The thought of her hands on you, hurting you while I was inside unaware." "But you came. You saved me." "Barely in time." He sank down beside her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost vulnerable. "I cannot lose you, Rosalind. These weeks with you have been—" He stopped, searching for words. "I did not know I was starving until you fed me, not just with food, but with conversation, with your presence, with the reminder that existence can be more than endless politics and blood. If something happened to you because of me, it won't." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You won't let it. And I'm tougher than I look. You are mortal, fragile. A vampire could kill you in seconds. Then teach me to defend myself, or assign me guards if you must. But don't push me away because you're scared. We're both scared. That doesn't mean this isn't worth it." He looked at her with such intensity that her breath caught. "You are remarkable. Do you know that? You keep saying things like that. I'm starting to believe you might mean them." "I have never been more sincere about anything in my existence." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Rosalind Reed. It is terrifying and inadvisable and absolutely inevitable. I cannot stop it any more than I could stop the sun from rising." Her heart felt too large for her chest. "I'm already in love with you, have been for weeks. I just didn't know if you—" He kissed her, deeper this time, less careful. His hand cradled the back of her head, and she tasted the desperation in his touch, the fear he'd nearly lost her, the relief that she was safe. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Stay with me tonight," he said, "not for anything improper. I simply need to know you are safe." "Xerxes, the sun will rise in a few hours. You'll have to sleep." "Then sleep beside me. I have blackout chambers. You will be safe there, and I will rest easier knowing you are protected." She knew what he was really asking: to see him at his most vulnerable, to trust him in the state that left vampires utterly defenseless. It was a level of trust that went beyond romance into something deeper. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll stay." He showed her his sleeping chamber, a windowless room deep in the mansion's heart, dominated by a massive bed and decorated with more of those unexpected personal touches, books on shelves, artwork on walls, a history preserved in objects. It looked lived in, comfortable, nothing like the cold vampire lair she might have expected. "I do not know what will happen now," he admitted as they lay together in the darkness, her body warm against his cool one. "The lunar court will not let this go. They will see your continued presence as defiance. Let them. I'm not leaving. Even if staying puts you in danger, especially then. You don't get to protect me by making my choices for me." She pressed her hand over his silent heart. "I choose this. I choose you, whatever comes." He held her tighter. Then I will ensure nothing comes. I will call a gathering of the vampire houses, formalize your position in my household. Once I declare you under my protection officially, killing you becomes an act of treason against the crown. The lunar court may be rebellious, but they are not suicidal. Will that work? It will have to. His voice was grim, because the alternative is war, and while I am prepared to fight, I would prefer not to drag the vampire world into conflict over their own prejudices. They talked until the approaching dawn forced him into sleep. The vampiric shutdown that left him corpse still and utterly vulnerable. Rosalind watched him for a while, this powerful being who'd given her everything and asked for nothing but her food and company in return. Then she slept too, safer in this windowless chamber than she'd felt anywhere else. The gathering was held a week later in a massive hall beneath the mansion that Rosalind hadn't known existed. Vampires arrived from across Xerxes' territory, representatives from every major house, elegantly dressed and radiating centuries of accumulated power. Rosalind wore a gown Xerxes had commissioned for her, deep burgundy silk that fit her curves perfectly and made her feel like royalty herself. "You do not have to do this," Xerxes said before they entered the hall. He looked magnificent in formal attire, every inch the king. "I can make the declaration without you present. We're doing this together," she said firmly. "I'm not hiding." Pride flickered in his eyes. "Then stay close to me. Some of these vampires are old and not particularly progressive in their thinking." The hall fell silent as they entered, all eyes turning to watch Xerxes and the human woman at his side. He led her to the dais at the room's head, where 2 throne-like chairs had been positioned. He took one and gestured for her to take the other. "Sit beside me," he said quietly, "as my equal in this moment." The murmurs that rippled through the crowd at that were impossible to miss, but Rosalind sat, keeping her spine straight and her expression calm despite the dozens of predatory gazes fixed on her. Xerxes stood, and silence fell immediately. "I have called you here to witness a declaration. Rosalind Reed, human chef and resident of my household, is formally placed under my personal protection. Any harm to her, any threat against her, any action taken with intent to remove her from my territory will be considered a direct attack on me and will be answered with the full force of my authority." "My king," a vampire in the front row said, rising smoothly, "forgive my question, but what is this human to you that she warrants such extraordinary protection?" "She is mine," Xerxes said simply, "and I am hers. I claim her as my consort if she will accept." The hall erupted into shocked whispers. Rosalind's heart stopped. Consort. That was a formal position she knew from her conversations with Helena. It meant recognized partnership, protection under law, a status that elevated her above any ordinary human in vampire society. "I accept," she said loud enough for the hall to hear. "If that means I get to stay with him, I accept." Xerxes' smile was small but genuine. He reached out and took her hand, and the gesture was clearly visible to every vampire present. "Then it is done. Rosalind Reed is my consort, protected by our highest laws. Spread word through all territories. Anyone who touches her answers to me." More whispers, but also some nods of acceptance. Vampire society respected power and clear declarations. By claiming her so publicly, Xerxes had made her untouchable to all but his most foolish enemies. The gathering continued for hours, various vampire houses presenting business and disputes for the king's judgment. Rosalind watched it all, fascinated by this glimpse into vampire politics. Xerxes was a good ruler, she realized, firm but fair, listening to arguments before making decisions, commanding respect through competence rather than just fear. When it finally ended, he led her from the hall with clear relief. That was exhausting. How do humans tolerate constant social interaction? "We don't, generally. We just hide it better." She leaned against him as they walked. "Consort? I should have asked you properly first," he admitted, "but the declaration needed to be absolute, and that term carries weight in our society. If you would prefer a different title, I prefer you." She stopped, turning to face him. "I don't care about titles. I care that we're together." "We are." He cupped her face in both hands. "For as long as you want me, we are together." "What about forever? Is that long enough?" Pain flickered across his expression. Rosalind, you are mortal. Forever for you is different than forever for you, I know. She thought about this, about the impossibility of their situation. But we have now. We have whatever time I have. Can't that be enough? It will have to be. He kissed her softly. Though the thought of existing without you after I have known you is nearly unbearable. Then we'll make the most of the time we have. They did. The months that followed were the happiest of Rosalind's life. She cooked for Xerxes every evening, experimenting with new flavors and techniques, watching his face light up with each meal that reminded him of his humanity. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories, building a foundation of trust and understanding. He courted her properly now that the danger had passed. Dates in the city, though always after dark. Trips to food markets where he bought her anything she wanted. Quiet evenings in his chambers reading together, her warm body curled against his cool one. He was endlessly patient with her, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, though she could see the hunger in his eyes growing stronger. Finally, she decided she'd waited long enough. 3 months after the gathering, after an evening meal where she'd made his favorite dish, the same beef preparation from that first night, she set down her fork and met his eyes across the table. "Stay with me tonight," she said. "Really stay with me." His expression darkened with want. "Rosalind, I know what I'm asking. I want you, all of you. I'm tired of holding back. I could hurt you. In the heat of the moment, if I lose control, you won't." She stood, moving around the table to stand before him. "You've had centuries to master self-control, and you care about me too much to cause me harm. I trust you, Xerxes, completely." He rose slowly, towering over her, and she could see the war in his expression. Desire versus restraint, want versus fear. "If I start and cannot stop, then I'll tell you to stop, and you will, because you're not a monster, no matter what you think. You're the man who eats human food just to remember being alive, the king who protects his people with everything he has, the vampire who fell in love with a human chef and declared her his consort in front of everyone who matters." She took his hands, feeling the coolness of his skin. "You're mine, and I'm yours. Let's stop pretending otherwise." He kissed her, then hard and desperate, all the restraint he'd shown for months finally breaking. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his hair, pulling him closer. He lifted her easily, vampire strength making her weight nothing, and carried her from the kitchen to his chambers without breaking the kiss. What followed was tender and passionate, careful and wild, everything she'd imagined and more. He was gentle with her, despite his strength, worshipping her body with hands and mouth and whispered words and languages she didn't speak but understood anyway. She gave herself to him completely, trusting him with her vulnerability, her pleasure, her heart. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his massive bed, her skin flushed and his eyes bright with satisfaction. He traced patterns on her shoulder with one finger, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "I love you," he said simply. "I have existed for centuries, and I have never felt this. Never wanted anyone the way I want you. Never needed anyone the way I need you. I love you too." She kissed his jaw, his throat, the place where his pulse should have been. "Even if this is crazy and impossible and probably doomed, nothing is impossible." His arms tightened around her. "I am a vampire king who can taste human food because of you. We have already achieved the impossible simply by existing together. Perhaps we can achieve more." "Like what?" "Like finding a way to keep you with me forever." She stilled. "Xerxes, we've talked about this. I'm human. I'm going to age and die, and you're going to... I could turn you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Rosalind pulled back to look at him. "What?" "I could turn you, make you vampire. It is not an easy process, and there are risks, but if it succeeded, you would be immortal. We would have centuries together rather than mere decades." Her heart raced. "You would do that?" "I would do anything to keep you, but it is your choice always. I will not force this on you. If you wish to remain human, to live your natural span and let me remember you after, I will accept that. But if you wanted forever, real forever, I could give you that." Rosalind's mind spun. Immortality, never aging, never dying, spending centuries with the man she loved, but also never eating her own food again, never tasting the dishes she created, never experiencing sunlight or growing old or any of the small human experiences that defined existence. "I need to think about it." she said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. This is not a decision to make lightly. But as she lay in his arms, safe and loved and happier than she'd ever been, Rosalind already knew what her answer would be. She'd found her purpose in life feeding the vampire king who'd given her everything. And if that purpose could extend beyond a human lifespan, if she could have centuries to cook for him, to love him, to build a life together that didn't have death looming over it, how could she refuse? The lunar court made one more attempt to remove her, sending assassins in the night who were caught by the guards Xerxes had positioned throughout the mansion. He dealt with them swiftly and without mercy, then sent their remains back to the lunar court leadership with a message. This is what happens to those who threaten my consort. After that, the threats stopped. Word spread through vampire society that Xerxes Forthwright would go to war for his human chef, and no one was foolish enough to test him further. 6 months after that first meal, on the anniversary of the night Xerxes had appeared in her cramped kitchen, Rosalind made her decision. "Turn me," she said over dinner, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I want forever with you. I want centuries to cook for you and love you and build whatever impossible life we can create together. Turn me." Xerxes set down his fork slowly. "Are you certain? Once done, it cannot be undone. You will be vampire, with all that entails." "I'm certain. I've never been more certain of anything. You will lose the sun. You will need blood to survive. Your human family will have to believe you died, or you will watch them age while you remain frozen. These are not small sacrifices. Neither is spending eternity without you." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "I don't have much family, and the few relatives I have barely speak to me. My whole life has been about cooking, about creating food that makes people happy. If I can do that for you, if I can keep making you taste your humanity for centuries instead of decades, that's purpose enough for me. You're purpose enough for me." His eyes shone with emotion too deep for words. "Then I will turn you, but we will do it properly, with preparation and planning. You will need time to settle your human affairs, to say whatever goodbyes you need, and I will ensure the transition is as painless as possible." They spent the next weeks preparing. Rosalind transferred her money, drafted a will, leaving her meager possessions to a culinary school scholarship fund, and wrote letters to the few people who would notice she was gone. Helena helped with the logistics, and Rosalind learned that many of the human staff were actually former humans who'd been turned, people who'd chosen vampire immortality for various reasons. "It's not easy," Helena told her honestly. "The first years are difficult, learning to control hunger, adjusting to sunlight sensitivity, dealing with the psychological impact of immortality. But if you have a reason to choose it, if you have love and support through the transition, it can be beautiful. King Xerxes will take care of you, and you'll have centuries to perfect your craft." The night of her turning, Xerxes took her to his private chambers and held her close. "Last chance to change your mind," he said softly. "I will love you regardless of your choice." "I'm not changing my mind." She kissed him deeply. "Make me yours, in every way possible." The process was intimate and intense, nothing like the violent turnings depicted in movies. He explained each step, making sure she understood, and when he finally bit her fangs sinking into her throat with sharp pain that quickly faded to something almost pleasurable, she felt the moment her human life ended and something new began. The transition took 3 days. She lay in Xerxes' bed while her body died and reformed, while vampire venom rewrote her biology at a cellular level. He stayed with her the entire time, holding her through the pain and fever, whispering reassurances in a dozen languages, never leaving her side. When she finally woke, the world had changed. Colors were sharper, sounds clearer, scents overwhelming in their complexity. And she was hungry, with a need that went beyond anything human. Xerxes provided blood, teaching her to feed properly, and gradually the hunger became manageable. She caught sight of herself in a mirror and barely recognized her reflection, same face, same body, but her skin had paled to ivory, her hair had lightened to platinum blonde, and her eyes were now the deep red of all young vampires. "You are beautiful," Xerxes said, watching her examine herself. "You were beautiful before, and you are beautiful now. I look like a vampire. You are a vampire, my consort, my eternal companion if you will have me." She turned to him, this man who'd given her everything and felt love so intense it nearly hurt. "Forever," she said. "I'll have you forever." They tested her new abilities carefully. She was faster now, stronger, could move with the same predatory grace as any vampire. But more importantly, when she entered her kitchen and began to cook, she discovered that immortality hadn't changed the most important thing. She could still create meals that let Xerxes taste his humanity. In fact, they were better now. As a vampire, she could smell nuances she'd never detected as a human, could adjust flavors with supernatural precision, could create dishes that were even more perfect than before. And every evening, Xerxes would sit at her kitchen table and eat whatever she'd made, and his eyes would light with remembered joy. Years passed, decades. Rosalind mastered her vampire nature while continuing to grow as a chef. She studied under human masters around the world, learning techniques from every culture, always returning to her kitchen in Xerxes' mansion to cook for the vampire king who'd fallen in love with her food. They traveled together, exploring the world at a pace humans could never maintain. He showed her vampire courts in Europe, ancient territories in Asia, hidden societies in South America. She cooked for vampire dignitaries and human guests alike, becoming famous in both worlds as a vampire chef who could make food taste like humanity itself. The lunar court eventually dissolved, its members scattered or absorbed into more progressive factions. Vampire society evolved, slowly embracing coexistence with humans rather than segregation. And through it all, Xerxes ruled with Rosalind at his side, the human-turned-vampire who'd reminded him what it meant to be alive. One evening, nearly 50 years after her turning, Rosalind prepared the same beef dish she'd made that very first night. They ate in the kitchen as they always had, the space transformed over decades, but still recognizably theirs, their sanctuary, their shared territory. "What does it taste like tonight?" she asked, as she'd asked 1,000 times before. Xerxes closed his eyes, savoring the bite. When he opened them, they were warm with memory and love. "Like the future," he said, "like all the centuries we have left together, like coming home to you every night for eternity and knowing I am the most fortunate creature who has ever existed." She reached across the table and took his hand. "That's funny. That's exactly what it feels like to me, too." He kissed her knuckles, an old-fashioned gesture he'd never abandoned. "I love you, Rosalind Forthwright." She'd taken his name decades ago, another formal declaration in vampire society. "I love you too, forever." "Forever," he agreed. And in their kitchen, surrounded by the tools of her craft and the evidence of centuries together, the vampire king and his chef sat together in perfect contentment, knowing they had accomplished the impossible. They had found eternal love, built on food and trust, and the courage to choose each other despite every obstacle. The dishes could wait. The night was young, and they had all the time in the world to savor it together.